Before we dive in, I'd like to ask a small favor. I'm pouring all my energy into reaching my goal of 1,000 subscribers, which means the world to me. Please, I'm asking you to hit that subscribe button. It's just a single click, but it gives me tremendous motivation to keep creating more videos. Thank you so much.
Eleanor was unceremoniously ejected from the administrative suite, not even afforded the dignity of gathering her personal belongings. Her hands, raw and burning from the harsh industrial detergent used to scrub the executive floors since dawn, throbbed with a stinging pain. Behind her, the imposing glass door of the management office sealed shut with a chilling finality, its click echoing down the plushly carpeted corridor like an unappealable judicial decree. Through the transparent partition, she glimpsed the furtive, hurried movements of senior staff, their heads bent in hushed conference over files and gleaming mahogany desks, as if the entire 5-year tenure of a loyal employee could be summarily archived and discarded between crisp manila folders and bureaucratic rubber stamps. She stood frozen for a long, breathless moment, the acrid scent of chemical pine and stale coffee clinging to her skin and clothes, a mocking testament to the quiet pride she had once taken in her labor, now shattered by this sudden, inexplicable betrayal. Her gaze fell to her trembling fingers against the worn fabric of her uniform. A cold wave of panic washed over her as she realized her wool coat, her house keys, the very electronic access card Richard Foster had snatched from her hand with a small, cruel smile, a gesture that needed no shouted words to inflict maximum humiliation, were gone. The silence in the executive hallway of Alvaria Tower pressed down, heavy and profound, broken only by the distant, rhythmic hum of a high-capacity laser printer churning out pages of corporate reports destined for oblivion, never to be read with genuine care. Minutes earlier, Richard Foster had stood before her, adjusting his expensive silk tie as he read from a cold, printed sheet, accusing her of unauthorized entry into the restricted archival sectors of the financial district's monolith. Eleanor had tried to speak, her voice steady despite the terrifying void opening within her, insisting she'd never possessed the security clearance to even approach those upper subfloors, let alone tamper with internal documents. Yet, Richard had merely tapped a manicured finger on the paper, pointing to a digital log and an unfamiliar authorization signature, bearing her name in a sloppy, computerized font, before coolly instructing her to make it easy on herself and leave immediately. Beside him, Irene Ross, the archival supervisor who had known Eleanor for half a decade, sharing countless early morning conversations over steaming thermoses of tea, remained utterly silent, arms clasped tightly around a thick leather binder, her eyes fixed resolutely on the floor. That silence, more than the fabricated accusations, pierced Eleanor deeply, a stark confirmation that in the grand hierarchy of the corporate tower, her humanity was utterly invisible to its architects. When Eleanor pleaded one last time to retrieve her canvas bag from the break room locker, her voice rising with desperation as she explained her daughter Claire's essential daily heart medication was tucked inside, Richard merely sighed with the practiced irritation of a man dealing with a minor administrative inconvenience. He dismissed her plight, suggesting with a dismissive wave of his hand that human resources would process her personal effects and deliver them to the ground floor reception by the end of the business week. Eleanor refused to bow her head or let the tears blur her vision. She stood tall against the oppressive luxury of the wood-paneled walls, the corporate machine churning around her as if she had already ceased to exist. A chilling clarity settled upon her. This was no tragic misunderstanding, no simple clerical error, but a meticulously orchestrated termination, designed to remove her before she could even formulate the questions she didn't know she needed to ask. The termination notice bore a terrifying phrase, seared into her memory. Immediate detachment ordered by superior instruction from the highest office of the Vance Group. That name, spoken only in hushed tones during board meetings, carried an immense, unyielding weight throughout Boston, representing an elite realm of old money and political influence that ordinary workers could never hope to challenge. As the elevator doors finally slid open with a soft, melodic chime, Eleanor stepped into the mirrored cabin alone, her fractured reflection staring back from the polished steel panels as the elevator began its swift, silent descent. In that glass, she saw not a broken victim, but a tired, resilient mother who had dedicated her adult life to enduring the cold indifference of wealthy employers to secure a future for her daughter. A faint smear of gray dust on her sleeve, a remnant from the supply room shelves, caught her eye. More importantly, her mind kept replaying the tiny corner of the document Richard had accidentally exposed when he folded it into his breast pocket. A single alphanumeric code, A17N, printed in the lower margin, a sequence that meant nothing to a cleaning woman, but clearly held immense significance for those who had orchestrated her sudden ruin. Upon reaching the ground floor, the ambient temperature plummeted, replaced by the sterile, air-conditioned draft of the grand marble rotunda, where wealth was on ostentatious display in every soaring column and abstract sculpture. Daniel, the security guard at the front desk, a man who usually greeted her with a warm smile and a comment on the New England weather, averted his eyes as she approached. He reached beneath the heavy marble counter and extended a small, battered cardboard box containing a few pathetic items that seemed utterly lost in the vastness of the space. "Management ordered me to give you these things immediately and escort you from the building without delay," he whispered, his voice tight with the fear of a man whose own job depended on unquestioning obedience. Eleanor looked into the box. A faded cotton handkerchief, a spare set of house keys, and her old personal notebook. But her blue canvas bag was nowhere to be seen. When she demanded to know its whereabouts, Daniel swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously toward the security cameras mounted high on the vaulted ceiling, before whispering that administration had ordered the bag retained for internal review. Eleanor placed both her worn hands flat against the polished surface of the reception desk, not with an outburst of violence, but with a terrifying, absolute calmness that made the guard involuntarily step back. She reminded him quietly that he had seen her enter the building with that bag that very morning, and made him promise to remember that she was being forced to leave without it, entangling him in the truth, whether he willed it or not. The heavy glass revolving doors of Alvaria Tower propelled Eleanor out into the suffocating, humid heat of Atlantic Avenue, where the relentless roar of downtown Boston traffic struck her like a physical blow. The city surged with its usual frantic energy. Commuter buses screeched at corners, construction crews hammered in the distance, and hundreds of business professionals rushed past without a single glance, entirely unaware that her world had just been systematically dismantled. Eleanor walked slowly to the concrete transit island across the street, her limbs feeling impossibly heavy, and sank onto a weathered wooden bench baked hot by the afternoon sun. She placed the small cardboard box on her lap, the metallic clinking of her spare keys against the cardboard sounding tiny and pathetic amidst the surrounding urban cacophony. Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to maintain composure and slowly pulled the old blue personal notebook from the box, flipping through its dog-eared pages in search of familiarity. The pages were filled with mundane grocery lists, reminders to pay the electric bill, and small, affectionate messages Claire had scribbled in the margins over the years to brighten her long night shifts. As Eleanor reached a page near the very back, her eyes caught a faint, hurried inscription written in a frantic hand she didn't immediately recognize as her own. In the topmost corner, hidden beneath a list of cleaning supplies purchased months ago, were the words, "Must never trust the Central Archive if the code A17N ever appears on a manifest." The realization sent a cold shiver down her spine, despite the oppressive summer heat, as she connected this hidden note with the exact alphanumeric sequence she had glimpsed on Richard Foster's termination document upstairs. She snapped the notebook shut, the sudden sound lost in the roar of a passing city bus, as memories of a rainy evening 3 months prior began to resurface. Irene Ross had stopped her near the third-floor supply closet that night, her face pale, her hands trembling as she whispered a strange warning about institutional audits and hidden accounts before fleeing down the service stairs. Eleanor had dismissed it as corporate paranoia then, but now she understood she had been an unwitting pawn in a far larger, incredibly dangerous game played in the tower's dark corners. A long, polished black luxury sedan glided smoothly to the curb directly in front of the Alvaria Tower entrance, its tinted windows reflecting the harsh glare of the city skyline like obsidian armor. The ambient murmur within the glass lobby shifted instantly. Security guards and receptionists straightened their postures as the vehicle's door was opened by a uniformed driver. Marcus Vance, the elusive patriarch and undisputed owner of the Vance Group, stepped onto the pavement, a sleek leather portfolio tucked beneath his arm with the effortless confidence of a billionaire. He moved without haste, nor did he linger. He possessed that rare, imposing manner of men who have spent their entire lives assuming no door in the civilized world could ever be closed against them. As Marcus turned his gaze toward the transit stop, adjusting his tailored suit jacket, his sharp eyes locked directly onto Eleanor, seated on the wooden bench with her cardboard box. He paused for a fraction of a second, spoke a brief word to his personal security detail, and then began walking directly across the busy avenue toward her, his custom leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the asphalt. Eleanor did not stand as the billionaire approached the transit bench, choosing instead to hold her cardboard box tightly against her chest, a modest shield against his imposing presence. Marcus Vance stopped just 2 feet away, his expression utterly devoid of the superficial corporate compassion wealthy executives often employ to maintain distance from the working class. He addressed her by her full name, Eleanor Duarte, his deep voice carrying an absolute certainty that required no confirmation, stating he required her to accompany him back inside the building immediately. Eleanor let out a short, dry laugh, devoid of humor, informing him coolly that his management team had just terminated her employment under an accusation of gross misconduct and forced her onto the street. Marcus looked down at the box on her lap, his brow furrowing slightly, before pulling a duplicate copy of the termination manifest from his leather portfolio and holding it out toward her. He stated quietly that the document claimed to bear his personal signature from the executive office, but he revealed with absolute coldness that he had never signed it, meaning someone within the tower had committed forgery to expel her. The revelation caused the frantic noise of Atlantic Avenue to fade into a dull hum in Eleanor's ears as she stared at the official document, her mind racing to comprehend the sheer scale of the deception. Marcus Vance explained that his automated security network had flagged an irregular use of his digital endorsement code less than 1 hour ago, leading him directly to her file. Eleanor looked up into the older man's face, searching for any sign of a trap, but she found only the hard, calculating focus of an investigator who realized his own empire was being manipulated from within. She informed him that Richard Foster had used that very paper to seize her personal bag, lock away her access keys, and threaten her daughter's safety if she attempted to protest her sudden dismissal. Marcus turned his gaze back toward the towering glass facade of Alvaria Tower, his jaw tightening as he asked her who else had been present in the room when the document was delivered. Eleanor told him that Irene Ross had witnessed the entire event in silence, and she revealed that her blue bag contained something far more critical than personal effects. It held the restricted medicine that kept her daughter Claire stable. Marcus Vance turned back toward Eleanor, his voice dropping to a low, authoritative whisper that commanded absolute attention amidst the surrounding noise of the Boston streets. He stated that he was not asking for Richard Foster's permission to conduct an investigation, but he acknowledged that Eleanor was the one who would ultimately suffer if they did not expose the true origin of the fraud immediately. He revealed that the mysterious code A17N was linked to a highly sensitive, long-dormant corporate account that should have been completely inaccessible to regional managers like Richard Foster. Eleanor stood up from the transit bench slowly, her knees stiff from tension, and told the billionaire that she would only step foot inside that glass tower again if the front security guards remained present and every digital camera in the main rotunda was fully operational. Marcus agreed with a single sharp nod of his head, extending his arm to guide her back across the hot asphalt of Atlantic Avenue, as if she were a valued board member rather than a discarded member of the janitorial staff. As they crossed the threshold of the grand revolving doors, the chilly, sterile air of the lobby hit Eleanor's skin once more, but this time she was flanked by the absolute authority of the building's owner. Daniel, the security guard, stood up instantly when he saw Marcus Vance enter, his face draining of all color as his hands fumbled with the buttons of his communication console. Marcus did not hesitate. He commanded Daniel to immediately pull the digital surveillance footage from the third-floor archive corridor from the past 72 hours and transfer it to the primary boardroom. Before the guard could answer, a sharp voice echoed from the rear elevator bank as Richard Foster hurried out into the marble rotunda, holding Eleanor's missing blue canvas bag tightly under his arm. Richard began to speak rapidly, adjusting his posture to address Marcus with a nervous, overly subservient smile, while claiming that administration had just located the missing property in a mislabeled storage bin behind him. Irene Ross followed with slow, hesitant steps, her fingers twitching against the fabric of her blouse as she refused to look Eleanor in the eye, her entire demeanor radiating a profound, consuming guilt. Eleanor walked directly up to Irene, stopping just inches away from her, and demanded that she return the bag immediately before any more lies could be written into the corporate record. Irene looked at Richard for some sign of guidance, but the manager was entirely focused on Marcus Vance, attempting to explain away the situation as a simple procedural misunderstanding regarding high-security sectors. Marcus cut him off with a single devastating sentence, ordering the entire group to move into the primary executive conference room on the second floor without another moment of delay. The walk up the wide marble staircase was completely silent. The tension between the five individuals, so thick that even the passing office clerks stopped in their tracks to watch the unusual procession. They entered the boardroom, a massive space dominated by a 20-foot table of polished walnut and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the gray waters of the Boston Harbor. Eleanor did not take a seat. She stood at the foot of the long table and placed her cardboard box down with a firm, deliberate thud, waiting for the corporate players to reveal their hands. Marcus Vance placed the blue canvas bag in front of her, instructing her to open it and verify its contents in front of everyone present so that no further accusations of theft could be made. Eleanor unzipped the worn fabric of her bag with steady fingers, her heart pounding against her ribs as she pulled out the plastic container of Claire's daily medication and set it safely on the table. She reached deeper into the interior pocket, expecting to find her wallet and house keys, but her fingers brushed against a heavy, cold metallic object that she knew did not belong to her. She withdrew her hand and revealed a long, intricately brass-cut security key stamped with the master seal of the tower's private executive vaults, an item an ordinary cleaning woman could never possess legally. Richard Foster immediately leaned across the table, pointing a dynamic finger at the key, while loudly declaring to Marcus that this was absolute proof of Eleanor's involvement in the archival theft. Eleanor did not flinch or raise her voice. She held the brass key between two fingers and looked directly at Irene Ross, asking her quietly who had truly put that object into her bag while it was locked in the administrative office. Thomas Logan, a junior legal assistant who had been summoned to the room by Marcus's security detail, entered quietly with a portable terminal and began pulling up the real-time system logs. The silence that settled over the executive boardroom was incredibly tense as Thomas Logan tapped rapidly on his portable terminal, the blue light of the screen reflecting off his spectacles as he analyzed the security architecture. He looked up at Marcus Vance, his voice hesitating for a fraction of a second before he revealed that the security log showed Eleanor's access card had indeed been used to enter the vault. But the system recorded a manual override from an administrative terminal. Richard Foster shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his expensive leather shoes squeaking loudly against the hardwood floor as he claimed that his computer must have been compromised by an external hacker. Eleanor stepped toward the table, her voice cutting through his excuses, as she pointed out that the manual override had occurred exactly 12 minutes after Richard had confiscated her card in the hallway. She looked at Irene Ross, demanding that she speak the truth, before the digital records trapped them all in a lie from which their careers could never recover. Irene's breath hitched, her eyes filling with tears as she finally confessed that Richard had forced her to plant the vault key in Eleanor's bag while she was being escorted down to the lobby. Irene explained between frantic breaths that file A17N was not an ordinary corporate file, but a hidden financial ledger detailing millions of dollars in duplicate payments to fictitious suppliers across the state of Massachusetts. She revealed that she had discovered the digital trail by accident during a routine departmental purge, and when she had tried to bring it to light, Richard had threatened to terminate her employment and strip away her pension. Eleanor felt a sickening wave of clarity wash over her as she realized she had been chosen as the scapegoat simply because she was an invisible presence in the building, someone whose sudden dismissal would never catch the attention of an external auditor. Richard Foster's face turned a deep, angry crimson as he shouted that Irene was an unstable employee who was fabricating stories to cover her own administrative incompetence and protecting a thief. Marcus Vance did not raise his voice, but the absolute coldness in his tone silenced the room instantly as he ordered Thomas Logan to freeze every financial transaction associated with the regional management accounts. He turned to Richard, stating that the use of a forged executive signature was a federal offense, and he promised that the full weight of the Vance Group's legal team would be deployed to uncover every participant in the fraud. Before Richard could respond, the internal security intercom on the boardroom wall chimed loudly, and the voice of the secondary reception guard down on the basement level came through with an urgent tone. The guard reported that a young woman named Claire Dart had just entered the building through the lower maintenance doors, claiming she had received an urgent text message stating her mother had been injured in an accident. Eleanor's blood ran completely cold at the mention of her daughter's name. Her hands gripping the edge of the walnut table so hard, her knuckles turned white as she realized the depth of the malice they were facing. She looked at Richard, seeing the small, smug glint of satisfaction return to his eyes, and she understood that he had used her daughter as a desperate insurance policy to force her silence. Marcus Vance did not wait for an explanation. He grabbed his leather portfolio and commanded the entire group to descend to the lower reception area immediately, his security detail moving into defensive positions around Eleanor as they hurried down the service elevators. The mechanical clanking of the cables felt louder than before, a grim soundtrack to a mother's escalating terror as she prepared to protect her child from the corporate wolves. When the elevator doors opened into the concrete corridor of the secondary basement reception, Eleanor sprinted past the security detail, her worn shoes slapping hard against the industrial linoleum, until she saw Claire sitting on a metal bench. Her daughter looked incredibly small in the harsh fluorescent lighting, her face pale with anxiety as she clutched her school backpack against her lap, her eyes wide with relief when she saw her mother alive and unharmed. Eleanor threw her arms around Claire, holding her with a fierce protective desperation that ignored the billionaires, lawyers, and corporate managers standing in the hallway around them. She checked her daughter's pulse, feeling the rapid, fluttery beat beneath the young girl's skin, and she immediately pulled out the container of medicine she had retrieved from the boardroom upstairs to administer the required afternoon dosage. Claire swallowed the pill gratefully, her breathing slowing down as she explained that an anonymous number had sent her a message 10 minutes after her mother left for work, instructing her to bring Eleanor's blue personal notebook to the side entrance if she wanted to save her mother's job. Marcus Vance stepped forward, his expression grave as he reached out his hand toward Claire, asking her with extreme gentleness if she still possessed the original text message on her mobile device. Claire pulled the phone from her pocket and handed it over, her fingers trembling slightly, as Thomas Logan immediately connected the device to his portable diagnostic terminal to trace the digital routing. The text message contained a chillingly specific instruction, telling the young girl to utilize the old maintenance elevator near the loading docks and to avoid speaking to the primary reception staff at all cost. Richard Foster leaned against the concrete wall, arms crossed, a loud scoff escaping him as he suggested a teenager receiving an anonymous message was hardly a corporate conspiracy, and that the girl was likely confused. Eleanor turned on him, a fierce, quiet rage simmering in her eyes that made even Marcus's security guards instinctively tighten their grip on their holsters. She informed him her daughter knew this building better than he did, having spent countless holiday shifts waiting in the break room. She demanded to know how an anonymous outsider could possibly know about her personal blue notebook, an item that had been locked inside her private janitorial locker until that very afternoon. Thomas Logan looked up from his diagnostic screen, his face etched with technical certainty, revealing that the anonymous text hadn't originated from an external mobile network at all. He explained the message had been broadcast through the building's internal internet system, utilizing a highly restricted administrative template reserved exclusively for the senior executive suite on the top floor. Marcus Vance's jaw tightened into a hard, dangerous line as he realized the conspiracy within his company extended far beyond Richard Foster's regional management desk. He looked at Irene Ross, standing near the elevator bank with her head bowed, and asked her who else had access to the specific archival protocols mentioned in file A17N. Irene swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper as she confessed the duplicate payments had been authorized through a defunct charitable organization known as the Claire Arbolada Foundation, an old philanthropic program his own family had established 2 decades prior to fund urban development projects. The revelation that fraudulent payments were flowing through a historic family foundation cast an uncomfortable, heavy silence over the basement reception area. The cold air from the ventilation system hummed above their heads. Eleanor looked down at her blue notebook, still tucked inside the cardboard box, and remembered the cryptic warning Irene had written months ago about not trusting the archive. She opened the book and pointed to the faded ink, demanding Irene explain exactly why she had chosen to hide that specific notation within a cleaning woman's personal grocery lists, rather than going to the authorities. Irene stepped forward, her hands trembling, confessing she had discovered a series of encrypted files within the Foundation's digital database that utilized Eleanor's employee identification number as the primary authorization key for millions of dollars in offshore transfers. She explained she had written the note in Eleanor's book in a moment of sheer panic, knowing that if an internal audit occurred, the digital trail would artificially point directly to the janitorial staff as the architects of the theft. Claire gasped softly, Reaching into her backpack and pulling out a folded, official-looking document she had received in the mail 3 weeks prior from an anonymous legal office in downtown Boston. The document was a formal confirmation of a full academic scholarship awarded to Claire by the Claire Arbala Foundation, complete with a monthly stipend for medical supplies and transport expenses that had finally allowed Eleanor to sleep at night without worrying about impending bankruptcy. Eleanor stared at the paper in absolute horror, realizing with crushing weight that the people framing her had simultaneously purchased her daughter's educational future with the very money they were stealing from the corporation. The scholarship agreement contained a specific hidden clause in the fine print, stating that the benefits would be immediately terminated if any member of the Duarte family participated in internal disputes or unauthorized disclosures regarding the Vance Group's archival operations. Marcus Vance took the scholarship document from Eleanor's hand, his eyes scanning the fraudulent text with a mixture of profound anger and corporate shame. Recognizing the complex, sinister brilliance of the trap laid for his employee, he turned to Richard Foster, asking with absolute coldness how a regional manager could possibly possess the authority to issue academic scholarships from a restricted family foundation without executive approval. Richard did not answer. His arrogance had completely evaporated, replaced by the desperate, calculating look of a middleman who realized he was about to be sacrificed by the true masters of the game. Thomas Logan suddenly tapped his terminal again, alerting Marcus that an automated command had just been issued from the main financial office on the 10th floor, ordering the immediate destruction of the physical backup hard drives containing the A17N files. Before anyone could move, the wall phone in the basement reception began to ring, with a persistent, jarring sound that echoed off the concrete walls like an alarm. Daniel the guard answered the call, his face turning completely pale as he listened to the voice on the other end, before handing the receiver directly to Eleanor, stating that someone on the top floor demanded to speak with her alone, or her daughter's scholarship would be permanently deleted from the Federal Registry. Eleanor took the heavy black receiver from Daniel's hand, her fingers pressing hard against the plastic as she braced herself for the voice of the person who had orchestrated her nightmare from the shadows of the 10th floor. A woman's voice, cold, precise, and entirely devoid of human empathy, came through the line, instructing Eleanor to ascend to the main financial office alone within 5 minutes if she wanted to preserve her daughter's future. The caller stated with absolute certainty that if any security personnel or executives accompanied her into the elevator, an automated system would instantly submit a formal criminal complaint to the Boston Police Department, accusing Claire of receiving fraudulent corporate funds. Eleanor did not speak a single word in response. She simply set the receiver down on the counter with a quiet, deliberate click that signaled her absolute refusal to be intimidated by an unseen enemy. She turned to Marcus Vance, informing him that the person upstairs believed they could isolate her, but she revealed that her old blue notebook contained a hidden piece of evidence the conspirators had completely overlooked during their hurried frame-up. She pulled out the short graphite pencil Claire had given her and began rubbing the side of the lead across the page that had been torn out directly behind Irene's warning note months ago. As the dark dust settled into the indentations left by a ballpoint pen on the preceding sheet, letters began to emerge from the blank paper, like ghosts rising from a forgotten grave, spelling out a specific physical location: subfloor storage, locker B6. Irene Ross let out a soft cry of recognition, explaining that locker B6 was an abandoned military-grade safe located deep within the building's technical foundations, a place where old paper manifests were kept before the digital transition. Eleanor looked at Marcus, stating that the threat on the 10th floor was a calculated distraction designed to draw them away from the true repository of the original corporate records. Marcus Vance immediately split the team, ordering Thomas Logan, Irene, and Daniel to descend into the subfloor technical vaults with a portable camera to secure locker B6. While he and his personal security detail accompanied Eleanor up to the financial suite to confront the caller, Claire insisted on remaining by her mother's side, her young voice carrying an absolute, unyielding dignity that mirrored Eleanor's own resilience as she stated she would no longer allow her education to be used as a weapon of blackmail. They entered the executive elevator together. The mechanical ascent toward the 10th floor felt incredibly slow as the lights shifted from the industrial gray of the basement to the luxurious gold of the financial offices. When the doors finally slid open, the entire floor was completely deserted. The long corridors of glass offices were silent, save for the low, rhythmic whirring of a commercial shredding machine working in the dark at the end of the hall. They walked slowly toward the primary financial director's suite, their footsteps muffled by the thick, expensive carpeting, until they reached a heavy mahogany door that stood slightly ajar. A single sheet of white paper rested on the floor beneath the brass handle. Marcus Vance pushed the door open to find the office completely empty, but a small digital tablet was resting on the center of the desk. Its screen glowed with a live stream video feed from the subfloor technical vault below. The digital screen on the tablet showed a real-time view of Thomas Logan and Daniel the guard standing before the rusted iron door of locker B6 in the concrete depths of the subfloor, their tools ready to breach the old security lock. Suddenly, a pre-recorded video message interrupted the live stream, and the face of Audrey Bennett, the chief financial officer of the Vance Group, who had allegedly been on an extended international business trip, appeared on the screen. Audrey spoke with a chilling, clinical calmness, revealing that the digital trap had already been executed the moment Marcus Vance froze the regional accounts, and she stated that an automated indictment had just been transmitted to the district attorney's office. The indictment did not name Richard Foster or Audrey Bennett. Instead, it utilized the falsified security logs and the scholarship documents to paint Eleanor and her daughter Claire as the primary conspirators in a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme. Eleanor felt the room tilt slightly around her, the sheer audacity of the corporate corruption threatening to overwhelm her. But she looked at Claire and found the strength to keep her feet firmly planted on the floor. Down in the subfloor, the rusted door of locker B6 finally gave way with a loud metallic screech that echoed through the tablet's audio feed, revealing an old leather briefcase tucked inside the dark interior. Thomas Logan reached inside and pulled out a stack of physical, hand-signed authorizations from 5 years ago, documents that had been preserved by a former internal auditor named Margaret Stone before she had suddenly resigned from the company under mysterious circumstances. Margaret Stone's handwritten notes on the margins of the ledgers revealed that file A17N had been established long before Richard Foster ever arrived at the tower, serving as a permanent mechanism for senior members of the Vance family to divert corporate profits into private political campaigns. Marcus Vance stared at the physical signatures on the screen, his face turning an ashen gray as he recognized the elegant, sweeping handwriting of his own younger sister, Sylvia Vance, the co-chair of the family's global charitable operations. The entire conspiracy was not an administrative scam run by low-level managers, but a massive family protection shield designed to hide his sister's illegal financial operations behind the names of expendable cleaning staff. The internal phone on the financial desk rang once, and Marcus answered it with a trembling hand, his voice cracking with an intense emotional weight, as he demanded to know if his sister was currently listening to the transmission. Sylvia Vance's voice came through the line from an undisclosed location outside the city, confirming with an absolute lack of remorse that she had authorized the frame-up of Eleanor Duarte to prevent a federal investigation from destroying the family's legacy. She informed her brother that if he allowed Eleanor to leave the building with the physical ledgers from locker B6, the family's global stock value would collapse by morning, destroying the livelihood of thousands of innocent workers across the country. Eleanor strode directly to the desk, plucked the phone from Marcus's grasp, and addressed the billionaire's sister head-on, declaring that a family legacy built on the systematic ruin of mothers was no empire worth salvaging. Her name, she insisted, and her daughter's future were not commodities to be bartered for the Vance family's ease. She pledged to stand before the federal grand jury herself, to personally deliver the unvarnished truth. The unraveling of the conspiracy at Alvaria Tower wasn't marked by a sudden, explosive climax, but by a protracted, draining cascade of forensic accounting audits, independent federal investigations, and public revelations that systematically eroded the impenetrable shield surrounding the Vance Group. Sylvia Vance and Audrey Bennett were stripped of their corporate authority within 48 hours of the confrontation. Their names were added to a formal federal indictment, exposing decades of pervasive financial manipulation within the charitable foundations of Massachusetts. Richard Foster was apprehended by federal marshals directly from the second-floor boardroom. His expensive silk tie and bespoke suit were exchanged for the stark reality of a judicial system he had believed he could perpetually manipulate with forged signatures. Irene Ross, though spared maximum criminal prosecution due to her eventual cooperation, forfeited her position within the Central Archive and was left to grapple with the crushing, enduring knowledge that her crippling fear had nearly annihilated the life of an innocent friend. Marcus Vance, rather than attempting to bury the scandal, deployed his vast wealth to establish an independent, externally managed trust, permanently safeguarding the academic scholarships of Claire and countless other children from underprivileged backgrounds across Boston. Thomas Logan was elevated to Chief Compliance Officer of the newly reorganized corporation, ensuring that every digital record and security protocol would henceforth be subject to rigorous, transparent oversight, impervious to executive caprice. Daniel the guard resumed his post at the front desk in the grand marble rotunda, his stance noticeably more relaxed, the oppressive atmosphere of fear and corporate intimidation having been thoroughly expunged from the monolithic glass structure. Eleanor Dart declined the generous offer to return to her senior custodial role, complete with a salary increase and official administrative status. Instead, she chose to walk away from the glass tower that had so long rendered her humanity utterly expendable. She accepted fair financial compensation for her wrongful termination and emotional distress, using the funds to secure a quiet, modest home for herself and Claire in a peaceful neighborhood near the Massachusetts coast, where the air carried the scent of salt and boundless horizons, not industrial detergents. Her worn blue personal notebook lay on her new wooden kitchen table, its pages a sacred testament to a mother's fierce, silent struggle against an empire that had sought to erase her, but ultimately failed to crush her spirit. As the soft, golden light of a late New England autumn streamed through the pristine windows of her new home, Eleanor sat opposite Claire, watching her daughter pore over her college textbooks with a serene, focused peace that had been forged in an immense crucible of adversity. Looking back on the long, winding trajectory of her 70 years, Eleanor understood that the true measure of a life's worth is never found in the towering monuments of glass and stone that men erect to commemorate their fleeting fortunes, but in the quiet, unwavering boundaries of personal dignity that we refuse to let the powerful trample. For those who have aged in a world that too often gauges value by the thickness of a wallet or the weight of a corporate title, it becomes a profound, undeniable truth that silence in the face of injustice is never a sanctuary, but a slow, insidious surrender of the soul to the machinery of malice. A mother's heart learns, through years of labor and sacrifice, that we do not protect our children by teaching them to bow before the wealthy or to accept the scraps of a corrupt system disguised as charity, but by demonstrating how to stand tall when the winds of malice buffet their character most fiercely. The genuine humanism of our brief time on this earth lies in the simple historical reality that our names belong solely to us, and no amount of corporate might, ancestral lineage, or systemic leverage possesses the right to rewrite our truth into a narrative of convenience for the privileged few. As bones grow weary and hair turns to silver, the elder generation bears the sacred duty to remind the young that dignity is not an artifact to be purchased or a privilege to be bestowed by a master, but an internal fire that must be defended with every breath we possess, even in utter solitude. Eleanor gazed out at the relentless procession of ocean waves crashing against the distant shore, knowing that the cold tower in Boston would continue to mirror the sky's false, sterile blue for generations to come. But she stepped forward into her twilight years with the magnificent, absolute certainty that her name was clean, her daughter was free, and her silence had finally been broken. The lesson of the Blue Notebook was not one of vengeance or bitterness, but of the quiet, enduring triumph of truth over power, a legacy of righteousness that would be indelibly etched into Claire's heart long after the glass walls of Alvaria Tower had crumbled back into the dust of the earth.